It's a dark and stormy night in Grimsley Village. The kind of night Dr. Derange has been waiting for. Tonight, he will be taking advantage of a lightning storm to further his work on animating a giant brain. With help from his mechanical minions, Dr. Derange hopes to see the culmination of his diabolical plans. Inside, all preparations have been made. The brain is resting on the platform being fed by tubes of fluids. The electrodes are in place leading up to the lightning collector installed on the roof. In a fevered frenzy, Dr. Derange works to finish the construction of his electrical plasma machines, which he hopes will harness enough energy to animate the brain. His work is cutting edge and dangerous. You can see his formulas on the chalkboard, books, charts, and laboratory equipment. It's taken years of work culminating this one night. The brainoscope is his own design and has been instrumental in his understanding of the brain. On the outside, the lab appears calm and serene, surrounded by seasonal pumpkins and vines. But inside, it's a different story. The storm is getting closer, which means it's time to fire up the machines. Everyone in Grimsley Village senses something is about to happen. After tonight, the world might not ever be the same. It's that time of the year when I get my Halloween groove on and bring you new spooky projects. The first one of the season is a new addition to last year's Halloween Village, a mad scientist laboratory. It's sort of a mix of Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory meets old 50s and 60s science fiction movies with a touch of steampunk. On a side note, the previous year's project tutorials and image sets never go away. Also, Alpha Stamp still carries many of the products I used on the older projects. With this project, with the exception of a few items from my stash, they are also carrying all the products I used for the laboratory. So now it's time to dive into the diabolical world of Dr. Deranged. I started off by trying to determine the size of the base. And the way I did that is kind of laid my stuff out, what I thought I would put in the piece, and the houses and how I wanted them to fit together, just to kind of get a general idea of what size it should be. So I ended up deciding that the base was going to be 24 inches wide by 11 inches deep. And I felt like that would accommodate all the different things that I was going to do. And then the base is made out of, it's just a piece of foam core that I cut, and I painted all the edges with a brown paint. I thought that would go with the flooring and the all the things that the paper and stuff I was going to use for the facade. And I used paper that is looks like wood, slats of wood, and you can see on that for the second photo at the top. On the left, you can see I've laid down two 12 by 12 sheets of this paper, and of course trimmed off the excess. And then you'll notice that you will see a line where the two meet in the middle. And if you look down to the photo below it, the way I handled that is I took another sheet of paper of the 12 by 12 and cut it up into strips, and then glued those strips down randomly, both over the line and then all over the rest of the base. And that ended up getting rid of the line. And I think it also made the flooring look more random. I think it looks, I just think it looks more interesting. And the other thing that I did was I took my Distress ink vintage photo, and I added that, rubbed that on in different places, both before I put the slats down, the extra ones, and then after, just to give it a little bit more worn and distressed look. So I did that for the whole thing. And then I need to determine, okay, what part of this is going to be the flooring that's on the inside, and then what part of this is going to be the outside that you will see when you look at the facade of the structure. And then to decide what that was going to be, I put my houses up in the place that I thought they would be, and I just drew a line, and that line told me what the difference was going to be. And as you can see from the first picture at the top the left, you'll see that they're sitting there. Of course, I've got a lot of work done already, but you can see how they're sitting, and that's how I determined where I wanted them to be, and that's where I drew the line. And then I cut paper, this cobblestone type paper, to cover that area that was going to be in front of the houses. And you can see it mirrors the shape of the picture in the left top. And then I kind of did the same trick with that area as I did with the flooring, in that, you know, you're going to have places where the paper meets because there's not going to be a piece of paper that wide. And so I took the extra pieces of the paper and I cut out the little cobblestones and I added them on top of the paper where there were joins in the different sections, and then kind of added them randomly other places too. So that took your eye away from those cuts and just made it look a whole lot better. And then I also want to point out, if you look at the inside of the building, you can see that I've covered the stuff with paper, and then I've also added some trim, and that trim came from this collage sheet that you see below that I have free for you on my blog. It's the same one I had last year for the village event for all the other houses that I did. So that will be available for you too. Just like with last year's village houses, I've used a chipboard set of house facades, and the only difference is in the village I did last year is most of the houses I just used one of those facades. For this, I used all four that come in the set, and I first laid them out to kind of figure out which one did I want where, and did I want some things to overlap. And so you can see in the top picture there how I kind of determined that I wanted the houses to look, or the different pieces to look on the facade. And then I covered them all with brick paper. And then, as you saw in the picture before, I also covered them with paper on the inside and then put all that trim on. Then the second picture there, you can see that I have, before I put these things together and glue them onto the base, you can see that I have done the roof lines, I've added windows, the door, all kinds of other things that it's easier to do when this is flat. And I'm not going to go through how I did all the roof and all that, because I did that several times in the videos last year for the village. But I just wanted you to see and get a look of how that looked. And some of the roof lines are popped up, and some, the ones that are bent, you know, I've made kind of a cone thing so that they stick out. So it's nice to do it this way when it's laying flat, because then you can get a sense of how you have to do the roof so that when you fit them together, they don't bump into each other or one fits under the other. And then you can see I've also covered the chimney with a stone chimney work. And a lot of the images that you see there on the front, they're either available in the new collage sheet for this project, or they're in the digital version. The digital version can have a lot more images than the collage sheets can. So that's where I put a lot of the extra stuff for this project. Now here you see, we're looking at the finished inside structure, and I want to use this picture just to point out some things to you. This is the same as last year. In something that you need to think about is, since you've just got this facade that's not really three-dimensional, you need a way to connect it to the floor. Now, I did glue each house down to the floor, but they're not going to stand up by themselves. So I'll go around from one side to the other, starting at the left, that first structure where you see the first big machine. Now, what you need to do is glue something to the floor to that. Now, the problem with this one was, and you'll see later when I go through how I made that, is because of all the lighting in it, I need to be able to pull it away from the wall and turn the lights on. So that house is not connected to the floor other than just gluing it at the base. But it is connected to the house next to it as you move to the right. And so that house and the next house are glued together where they connect. Then for the second house, moving from the left to the right, you see two more machines with lighting. Same thing. I have to be able to get behind there and turn all those lights on. So what I did is, they are standing there by themselves, but behind one of them, I took a box lid, a small box lid that was narrower than the one machine. It's actually the machine on the right. And I glued the top of the lid to the wall and the edge of the lid to the floor. So secretly behind there, I've got that box that is connecting that house to that house shape to the floor. Then if you move to the next house where you've got Dr. Derange standing there in front of the table, here the anchor point for that house is the table. So the table, the back of the tabletop is glued to the wall and the feet are glued to the floor. So that connects those two. And then for the fourth house, you see that I've got the big cabinet sitting on the table. Now all of that is glued to the back of that house. So between connecting the first two houses and then the next three being connected either through a box or through some of the furniture that you see, that keeps that whole facade standing up. Now this is the largest and the first of the electrical plasma type machines that I made. It's just a fantasy thing. And the base for this is a box that you see on the far right, and the box measures 5 inches by 4.5, and then it's 2 inches deep. And this box served a couple of purposes. One is I needed a place to put all the components for the lighting in something that's hidden and I could also get to. And then I also needed to accommodate the piping that you see going from the machine down to the floor. And you notice that I have created a special base for this that's not part of the flooring. And the reason I did this is because what I just said previously, where I don't want to glue this to the wall, I need to be able to remove it and get to the back. But that meant I didn't have a floor to put the piping into. So I just created this, it's just made out of chipboard covered with some of the metal plate images that I have in the digital kit. And so that gave me something to attach all those pipes to. And then in the middle there you see the first collage sheet. It's a 2-piece set. And that's what has the 3 machines that I used and a lot of other components. And then I'll talk about the second sheet in the set later on. But then the digital kit has everything that's in both of the collage sheets plus a bunch more stuff. Now before I actually put the box together, I needed to mark the places that I was going to have the lights come through. And so I've cut out an image of the main or the largest machine. And at the bottom area there where you see the little black square, that is where I'm going to have a tea light come through. And so I needed to lay that on the box with the area cut out so that I could mark a circle for where I need to make a hole. Now, I started doing this and then I decided, oh, I want to put some more lights in. So I actually in it, if you look up at the bottom image, you'll see 2 red spots there on the little panels. And that is another set of lights. So I actually did have to go back in, even though this picture doesn't show that, punch those holes out of the image and then mark those as well on that front part of the box. And it's so much easier to do this when you're not, before you put it together, because if you've got one of those heavy punches, you can punch that out, or if you need to drill it or however, use an awl to poke it out. It's just so much easier to do that before you put the whole thing together. Now you can see the box, it's assembled, you can see the base is on, and you can see that the tea light, the light part of it's been poked through that hole. And then, if you want to glue your wires down, all that down, you see the switch there, and there's the batteries on the back side of the black thing. But I just use tape to put it down that way for if there's any reason I need to pull it out or fix something, that I can remove it. Now, if you look to the right, you see another light set, two little red dots of light, and that's the light set that I ended up using for those little panels at the bottom, and that also got put in there. This is a picture before, and that's why I can tell you I know it's so much easier to do all your holes before you put it together, because I didn't decide this until after I put it together and I figured out all my lights, and then I was like, oh, I got another set, I'm going to put it in here. And so I had to go back in after it was put together and poke 2 more holes in, so that was kind of a pain. But anyway, one of the things I want to point out to you with the lighting, and when you see that the 2 little red lights, they don't look very red there, but if you look in the photo below, they are very red. And it's kind of hard to capture lighting when you take a picture, but the lights really do pop quite a bit, and those are very red. Now, instead of just sticking the image on the front of that box, I wanted to make it more dimensional, and I wanted to add some 3D things as well. So what I did is I actually printed the image twice, and I kept one image intact except for punching the holes where the lights were going to come through. And then the second version of the image, I cut out the center. And then what I did is I took that the second image, and put double stick foam tape, one layer of that on the back side of it, and then put that on top of the other, so you got that little distance between. Then I also cut out the little pieces of the piping, and I popped those up on top of the second image that's got the hole in it, as well as some of the components that were in that center section. So that way I just had layers of things that were popping out and made it look more dimensional. I also came in with glossy accents, and on the green plasma tubes on the final layer, I added that to the plasma tubes. I added it to any little dials or dots or lights or anything, just to make those look shinier and make those look more dimensional. And then in terms of adding three-dimensional things, if you look at the bottom, you see the two round brass-looking things. Those are actually furniture tacks, and I just poke those through the box and in those panels, and then that center little red plasma thing, that's one of those things I also added glossy accents to. And if you look to the far left, at the bottom, I wanted to add this lever type thing, you know, like the flips on and off, and you see that on big machines, you know, take the power down. And so I used a handle that I cut, it had prongs behind it. I cut that off, and then I just took a little tiny drawer pull or handle and upside down glued it to the front of that, and that made it look like it was one of these breaker switches or levers or whatever they're called. Now, if you look on the side, I have covered the box with some dark paper, kind of rusty looking paper. And I want to talk about how I actually made all the piping. And it's really easy. And I think it really has a good effect of looking like piping. And I just used straws, the bendy kind, and cut them at different lengths. And then to make it look like there are joints in between sections, I just took jump rings and slid 2 jump rings at each area, where I want it to look like it was a joint. And then I just painted that all with a copper colored paint. And an easy way to do that is to stick the straw, as you see on the far right, to stick that on some kind of a paintbrush or a wooden skewer, anything like that, that you can just hold it and then paint it, and that makes it really easy. So I just painted the whole thing, and then to connect that to the box, I used a couple of different things. At the base, I used those brass feet that you see. They looked very mechanical, very electrical to me, and so I glued the straws into those, with the exception of the front two, because really I just ran out of those. And for the front two, those are little mounts. They're old mounts that you screw a little light bulb in there, and then it's got those little prongs at the bottom to screw the light bulb down. So I used those for the front two, like I said, just because I ran out of the other ones. And then to connect the straws to the top, or to the body of the box, I just used the rondelles. And the easier way to do it is to glue the rondelle where it should be, and then glue the straw to the rondelle. And that kind of finishes off the edge of the straw, and it just makes this nice connection between the piping, the faux piping, and the box. Now this is the digital image set, and this has all the images, both the ones that are on the printed collage sheet or downloadable collage sheet, and a whole bunch of extras, a lot of bigger images like windows and the images that are behind the windows, and lots of bits and pieces and panels, metal panels. And in one of the panels is a 3x3 panel up. You can see it at the top, and that's the one I used 2 of those for the base of the big machine, because the base of the big machine is 6x3. And so I used 2 of those, printed 2 of those for that panel. So the nice thing about the digital set is that you get a whole lot more images, and they're separate images. So you just print out whatever you want, how many you want. And then, of course, you can change the sizes too if there's something that you want different. Now I'll point out a couple of more things. At the very top of the machine, I was looking at it after I finished it, and I thought, there's so much room on the top. I need to add some more stuff. And so what I ended up doing is adding 3 domed bottles. You're going to see me use those things all over this project. I must have used 10 or more of those things. And inside those dome things, I put an old car fuse. And I found some really cool ones on eBay, a whole bunch of them for cheap. And I think $10 for, I don't know, 20 or 30 of them. And I painted the ends, they were silver, but it was cool because it had this like zigzag lightning looking thing inside of it. And then I just twisted some copper wire and put that up in there and then just glued, I think it was just a piece of metal on the bottom to close it off. And then I used these little feet that you see right on top. You see the rondelles again, same rondelles that I used to attach the piping to the machine. And then on the top, those are just things that I have a huge stash of old clock and watch parts, and that's where those came from, my stash. And if you look at the bottom, you see the little black things that look like umbrellas, these little plastic dome things. I decided to add those to the bottom of the machine. So if you look up above, you will see that those little black things are there. And I've done the same trick as I did with the handle, switch thing, that I showed you before, where I put that together. I took a couple of knobs, miniature little knobs, and stuck those in the hole, so it kind of looks almost like it's a dial. And then I added a little bit more around that tea light down below. I just added a piece of it's a little gear, and then that's I think probably a watch part spiral spring there that I put on top, and I just thought that made it look a little cooler. Now here we have one of the smaller machines, and I approached it the same way as I did the big one. There's no box, but there are, I printed the full image first, then I printed it again and cut out the middle, and then used a few layers of double stick tape. I believe 3 layers of double stick tape. So there's quite a big gap between the front and then the back piece. And I did that so that it would not the dimension like I did with the first one, but I also wanted the distance between it wide enough that it would stand on its own. And since it didn't have this box to support it. And I did the same kind of trick. I used glossy accents at the top for that dial. And then you see there's a little pipe that sticks up. I put a little brass foot on top of that. It fit perfectly. And then in the middle, you see I've got the tea lights going on. So I cut the holes. The tea lights are actually glued to the back so that they're just stuck there. And then I used a couple of metal things from my stash that look kind of futuristic to me, and put those on top of the lights. And then down at the bottom, you see there's a row of these pewtery black looking knobs. Now those are just miniature drawer knobs again, and I've just flipped them. The fat part of the knob is against the back, and then the little spiky thing comes out. So I think it kind of makes it look like it's little dials. And at the top right, you can see all the different knobs, little miniature brass knobs. This is Alpha Stamps is carrying all this. So those are the types of things that I used. And then you also see those little brass feet. This is the last of the machines, and it's kind of got this plasma coil, Tesla kind of crazy thing in the middle. And again, the same deal, printed it twice, cut out the middle, made a big gap between the front and the back, then came into every little button, little dial, used glossy accents on all that to make them domed and to pop out. And then here I used a little bit different thing. I used these fairy lights, and they're just tucked in between the two pieces of images, and then they're just tucked right in the edge so that they just kind of glow into that center portion. The cabinet is made out of a chipboard kit, and I have laid the pieces out for you to help you see how to put them together. And the cabinet has a center section, then 2 side sections, and then a drawer. So you can see all those 3 sections laid out, and then all you would do is put the shelves in like you see, and then fold up each end and glue everything together. Here you can see how on the left-hand side all the pieces are glued together, and then on the right-hand side you can see how the drawer fits in the center. Now, of course, you've got a lot of options with this. You could hinge the sides, and if you did that, you can completely close it, so it's a closed cabinet. Or you could just glue the sides to the center straight across, or do them at an angle, which is what I did for the cabinet for this project. So on the left, you can see the finished cabinet. As I mentioned before, I decided just to glue the sides at an angle to the back. And instead of putting them as hinged, they were going to be open all the time. So I just thought I would just go ahead and set them up that way. And they're on a table. And if you look to the right, you can see it's kind of a leathery paper that I used for the outside. And then the inside, I used a lot of the metal panels that are included in the digital kit. And then down below you can see the table. It's just an unfinished wood table. And I cut the legs off. I kind of figured out how high the whole thing could be based on the facade of the building so that you wouldn't see the cabinet over the roof line. And then I cut the legs off and then stained everything with Distress Stain. I think it was the Vintage Photo Distress Stain. In addition to the collage sheets and digital image sets for the laboratory, I also have a couple of new things. One is a collage sheet full of open books and parchment paper, music sheets, letters, that sort of thing. And then there's a corresponding digital image set which has all of that, as well as a whole bunch of open books and collections of books. And so I've used some of these things to fill the cabinet. On the right-hand side, or excuse me, the left-hand side, you can see some of the books that I created from the digital sheet. And these books, you weren't going to really see the edges of the book, so I just stuffed them with thick pieces of chipboard just to make it go faster than trying to cut, lots and lots of pieces of paper. And then below that, you can see some images that come from one of the collage sheets, the Mad Scientist collage sheets, and another image off another sheet that has a lot of labels on it, bottle labels and things like that. And then I also did some candles. Since this was a laboratory, I decided the stands would be made out of nuts. And then I took birthday candles and stuck them in there, lighted them, and let them burn and drip down. So that's how I made the candles. Then you see kind of a more steampunk piece. That has a brain. I thought of it as like an examination machine. And the brain is just a brain eraser. You can see what they look like in the bottom right side of the image here. And they're just colored erasers. And so I decided to make it gray and green. And then I just did chipboard base. And then all the metal pieces that you see that are holding it all up, those are all just watch parts from my stash. So I was just kind of sticking things together to have something for the brain to sit on, and then something that went around it. And then it's holding in the front, or it's glued in the front, is an old optometrist glass. Here you can see a bunch of the other items that I put together to go in the cabinet. At the top on the far left, it's a little jar full of eyeballs. And then I've got this rubber creepy green arm and a domed tube, and that's the same dome tube glass tube that you saw me use on the big machine. And then I've got a couple of other domed things with a moldy skeleton, and then there's miniature little ravens in the next one. And then you see a whole series there of bottles, some of which are filled with powder or whatever I could come up with that would fit in the bottle. And then they have, a lot of them have little labels on them, and that comes from the same collage sheet as that other image that we just saw previously. And then if you look down at the next image on the lower left, you see a couple of little silver bowls full of powder, more bottles, and then you also see this flask stand. It has 3 holes in it, and there's 2 versions. There's a 2-hole version and a 3-hole version. And I've got 3 round bottles that just fit nicely in there, and some tubing that goes from each one. And what I did is I put a little bit of alcohol ink in each one, and then I put a bunch of clear glue, any kind of glue you want, glossy accents or whatever you happen to have that will dry clear. And then that way, if I just left the alcohol ink in, it would dry, and it'd be nice and colored, but it wouldn't look like there was goopy stuff in there. So with filling it up with the glue, it kind of mixes with the alcohol ink, and it actually looks kind of gross and mucky. And then also after I did that, then I could stick those tubes down in there, and they would stay glued and in place. And then you can see kind of a better shot towards the right of some of the dome containers that have little specimens in them, and the eyeballs and that sort of thing. Now you see the filled cabinets, all the bottles and books, and I also took some of the scrolls and rolled those up and stuck them underneath the bottles there. You see the brainometer or examiner or whatever, steampunk piece, the eyeballs, a candle, other papers, just all kinds of odds and ends. You also see at the top right, you see another one of the brains is stuck on a toothpick and is in one of those little mushroom cap type things that you saw me use on the machines. And then you see a little jar full of bones. So just a lot of odds and ends to look like some kind of what a scientist would have in a cabinet. Now here we have a table with a chalkboard behind it with all kinds of formulas, and that comes from the second part of the collage sheet set. The first part of the Mad Scientist sheet set had all the machines and stuff, and now this has a lot of different posters with all kinds of gruesome animals and whatnot and anatomy, and there's two different chalkboards, one blank and then one with the formulas, and then you've got other little scientific experiment diagram type posters and like an inside of a book and a scroll, and you've got some bottles, and then you've got Dr. Deranged himself. And so on the table, you can see that I have some bats up on stands, and I thought of them as like bat specimens, and those are actually in the digital set. And then you've got the bowls that you saw earlier, one of the bottles, some of the papers from the collage sheets, and then of course Dr. Deranged standing in front. And then the table, you can see that down in the lower left is just an unfinished, or lower right, excuse me. It's just an unfinished table that I dyed or stained the same way as the table before. And then you see there's kind of a scientific experiment bottle set, whatever, gizmo in the back. So we'll look at that at more detail. Here you can see a top view of the table, so you get a little better look at some of the things. And then this little gizmo, I used the 2-hole flask stand, and the larger bowl-looking thing is actually the cap to a Glossy Accents glue bottle. And then I've taken I had in my stash of clock parts, I had these metal tubes that had holes in them, and I thought that would really work nicely for holding bottles. And I used the clips that you see, or I guess they're like a paper clip, but there's some kind of a clip, and you can slide things into the area that's round, and I bent those so that I could stick the long part in the tube, and then the other part would be hanging over the flask stand, and then I put bottles in those. And then I also wanted to do something a little jazzy, maybe something. I started thinking about some kind of a filter or something, and I didn't really have any like miniature little screens, so I took a watch spring and put that on another stand, and then a bottle on top of that. And then the silver thing is another clock. It's a little dial for a clock piece, and then I put another tube type bottle on that. So that's how I kind of just put together this little experiment stand. The center platform where the giant brain is pulled up into to the top, where the lightning and the electricity equipment will send it down into the brain, and then the tubes are all feeding it with all kinds of fluids to reanimate this giant brain, is made from a kit that's a 12 by 4-inch kit that gives you the pieces just to make this platform. And I actually used 2 of those. I used one for the bottom and then one for the roof over the top of it. And the first thing you want to do, just like with the big box or that we did for the big machine, is you're going to want to cut all the holes that you need before you assemble it. And here you can see that this picture, you can see that I actually have the 4 holes for the columns that are going to hold those up, hold the top piece over the bottom piece. I've got those cut, and then I've covered all of this, the base part, with more of those metal panels. Now, the same thing happened with this as it did with the large machine, in that after I did this, I was like, oh, you know what? I've got more lights. I would like to put some lights underneath this thing, and there's lots of space under there to hide the lighting equipment. So I then went back in and punched a couple more holes to accommodate that lighting. Now here you see the lighting that I ended up adding. it's basically those same red lights that I used before. There's 2 of them. And then I ended up putting these kind of yellow globes over them, and it kind of really diffused the light and looked really pretty, so I liked that. And so those are the 2 extra things that I added. Actually, it was on both sides, not just the one side. Now, the top piece, made out of the same kit, is a little bit more complicated in terms of the holes that you need if you want to do what I've done here. And the first thing I did was find the center point of the whole piece of paper or piece of chipboard. And that is where I made a large hole to accommodate the wires that are coming out of the brain and going up into this electrical piece. The next thing I needed to do was have holes cut to accommodate the pulleys. Now the pulleys that I use, they come 4 in a set. And there's going to be pulleys on the mid platform down below and pulleys up here. So it looks like you could pull it up and down. You can't really, but it is suspended by the pulleys though. But so that you could accommodate those. And there's 3 different holes on each side you need to make. One is you need to make a hole for the screw that's in the bottom of the pulley. So there's actually this tiny little screw that you screw out. And so you can put the pulley on the top and then put the screw underneath the piece of chipboard, and that'll hold it in place. And then I needed a couple of holes for the chains to go down. So I just kind of held the pulley with the chain dangling over it and saw where it landed on the chipboard, and that's how I marked my holes. So I punched those 2 holes, and then just to make the hole look clean, I added a couple of beads that have a hole in them that were about the size that I needed. I added those on top of the hole, so that makes it nice and clean. And then I decided to add some more tea lights because they are shallow enough that they fit really nicely right underneath that roof. So I cut holes for those as well. And then that way I had holes to push those through, and I could glue those to the bottom. And then you can see too that I added some stuff on top of those lights to make it look good. Now I kind of racked my brain trying to think of what object could I find that I could create the dome with, and where all the collection of the lightning happens. And I'm like, what is a dome? What product has a dome? And so I finally thought about a dome that you get if you buy an icy at Circle K or 7-Eleven or wherever they have them. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And then also I looked at it and I was like, well, I'm not sure that hole's really big. So then I also remembered McDonald's has shakes where they have a dome over the top of it. So I got 2 of those, 1 of each kind. And then as I was fiddling with them, I thought, you know what, the dome, the bigger one, the icy one, it's great, but the hole's too big. But the other dome, I don't want the M's all over it. I don't want to see all that. So I ended up putting the one over the other, and they actually fit really nicely together, and I could glue them. Now I sprayed them with a glass paint. It's just a paint that you buy that it turns the surface into looking glassy. It was kind of interesting because it made the McDonald's one glassy, but it didn't make the other one glassy. So I don't know if there's a difference in the materials that it didn't do that, but it was fine. So I glued the one on the other, and then I thought about, you know, it'd be really cool to light that up. And so I took a string of the fairy lights and just tucked those inside between the 2 layers, and then ran the end of it back down, and I just tucked that little control thing right underneath the whole thing. Now this is not going to be glued down to the roof of the whole platform thing. For the same reason as other things, I got to be able to get into it and turn the switch off and on. So it just sits right up there by itself. And then in the far left-hand or right-hand side, you can see how it looks lit up with all the electrical stuff coming out of this collector to get the lightning to come down. And you can see how all that looks. Here you can see how I've put the electrical component collector together. You can see that I'm using straws, fatter straws than the ones I used for the pipes. And the straws fit really nicely into the brass feet that look electrical. And I used 6 of them. And then there's a straw in the center. And on that, I used another one of those mounts for a light bulb. And I thought that worked really nicely because it has the 2 prongs that come out on each side. And so I flipped that upside down, put that on the top of the straw that's in the center, then glued all the rest around. And then that allowed me to take some craft copper wire and glue it into the holes in those feet, and then put them up through those little attachments that are on the mount for the light. And then I kind of clipped them short, but not all the way down, and then added some glue so they would stay in place. And then once the glue dried, then I put the little caps on, those other little smaller brass feet. Now then in the center, I figured I needed some kind of rod that would go up like a lightning rod. And for that, if you look down on the right-hand side, lower side, that's a watch part or clock part. And to get it to stand on top of that electrical grouping of straws and whatnot, I needed a bigger surface area because it's just a tiny pole with a little bitty into it. So I used a bead cap, and I glued the bead cap onto the top of the electrical stuff, then glued in the watch or clock piece, and then on top of that, just to cover up the little top of it, I added another one of those little brass feet. And so all of that creates the little electrical component. Now the brain was kind of the inspiration for this entire project. The foam brain that you see on the right-hand side, I saw that last year and I was like, oh gosh, I should have created a mad scientist laboratory. So that's kind of been in my head since then. So it's a pretty good sized brain, and it's just a foam mushy thing. So I poked and cut parts of the foam out in order to have room to put the different electrical diodes or whatever you want to think they are. And it's the fuses for cars. And then I decided to paint them gold. They were silver. So I painted the metal ends gold. And then I added this Devo looking foot or cap on each end. And then that gave me a little hole. And so then I wrapped a bunch of wire to make it look wrapped and curled. And I wrapped a bunch of that craft wire, the copper craft wire, and you can see below in the middle of the image here, you see where I just wrapped it around a skewer, and just however big you want, how fat you want the coil to be, that's what you would want to use. So I just wrapped it several times and kind of kept pushing it down to get it out of the what I've already wrapped out of the way on the skewer, so I could keep wrapping more. And then when you get as much as you want, then just pull the whole thing out, and you just get this nice spring looking wrapped wire that's actually very springy. And so then I just glued that into these little diodes that I had created for the brain. Now for the platform that sits in the major platform thing that theoretically goes up and down, I just took a piece of chipboard, a heavy chipboard, and cut that, and then covered it with one of the panels that is in the digital kit, and it's sized for this, so that's the size of this platform here, and that's where the brain is going to sit. And you're also going to need to add the other two pulleys, so you'll be poking holes in this and putting the screw underneath and screwing it in. Now the thing you need to think about is after you do your spacing on the top, you need to be mindful of how big this platform is and where the pulleys on this little platform need to be, so that they're up, that one is underneath the other, so that the top ones are straight above the pulleys on this platform that's going to raise up and down. And then I also added, if you look on the right on the top, this is just decorative. I added some gears to make it look like it was more mechanical. And then if you look at the lower right-hand picture, so I start by, when I get ready to put the chain on, I actually put something underneath the little platform so that it would stay at the level I wanted it to stay. And I think I used an old cream cheese tub, something like that. I keep those kind of things around all the time. And so whatever you want to stack underneath it to get it to the level so that it sits there while you work on it and add your chain. And that also helps you know how long each chain should be. So once I figured out how long I wanted the chain to be, then I attached it by draping it on the top, the very, very top, and putting it through those holes that I punched with the little beads, and then having it come down, and then pushing it underneath the small platform piece there. And then I used a jump ring to connect the two pieces of the chain together. So now your pulleys you've got a chain that wraps all the way around to the top pulley, down through the roof, down to the pulley below and around that. Now you can see an image of the whole center section of the platform area. And notice that the copper wires are now going up to the center of the roof. If you look at the next picture over towards the right, you can see the copper wires coming through that center hole. Now, I made sure the wires were a couple inches longer than they needed to be so that I'd have some extra wire to poke through there. So once I kind of twisted it all up at the end and stuck it through that hole, I added some glue around the hole in the wires and let that dry, and then I snipped off the excess wire. I didn't want that excess to be too high because we'll be sitting the dome on top of that, and I didn't want it to block anything. Now, the other things that I added to the platform are the bottles of fluid. And they're just bottles with a gear on top of them and then tubing going into it. And I use the same trick with these bottles as the bottles in the cabinet, in that I put alcohol ink in and then added some clear glue, and I kind of did it in layers because these were much bigger bottles. And it looks kind of goopy and yucky, and then it also keeps the tubes glued in place. Now, a tip on doing this: when you get ready to put the tubes into the brain, which I cut holes for that just like I did for the electrodes, you're going to want to glue your bottles down on the platform first, because if you try to stick those tubes in and they're not glued down, the stiffness of the tube may very well make the bottle flip up because there's nothing anchoring it, and then you'll really have a mess. So glue those bottles down first and then work on getting the tube into the brain. The last thing for the roof I want to point out is on the right at the bottom for the holes that we cut out for the lights, the T lights. I also added a gear image from the collage sheet, and then I used the dome glass thing you've seen me use so many times. On top of that, it made the light look nicer and it kind of finished it up. Then with the little brass piece on top of that. The mini electrical conductor tower is one of the first things that I made. It reminds me of some of the stuff that you see in the old science fiction movies. And it's pretty simple. The bottom of it is the tea light, which is wrapped with paper. And then I got a ping pong ball and cut it in half. If you look closely at a ping pong ball, you'll see a little seam. I used a big box cutter to first cut a slit into it along that seam. And then I found it was very hard to cut all the way around evenly with the big box cutter. So then I got some of my heavy duty scissors and then cut the line all the rest of the way around. I did find these at CVS Pharmacy, so I'm sure there's lots of places you can find it if you're looking for them. Then for the tower part, I used curtain rings, plastic curtain rings, and as dividers between each of the rings, I used beads that were flat on each end, and then I just glued layer upon layer of 4 beads, plastic, 4 beads, plastic, however tall you want to go. And then I painted the whole thing with a copper paint. And then at the top, I've got the electrodes again going on with the car fuses, and then the Devo looking cap on the top of that. Another thing I could have done, which was still, I would look cool, it would be to do some wiring out of the top of that Devo cap. The mechanical creatures were really fun to make, and this little spider guy here, if you look on the right hand side, you'll see a lot of the supplies that I used. Now the first things that you see, the 2 gears and the 3 nuts, those are there to show you that if you don't have the round part that I have, that's from a clock, and so you might not have that. So if you wanted to create the same thing, then you could use a big gear, a washer, or a nut, excuse me, then a smaller gear, and then a couple more nuts, and just to build that kind of structure for yourself. Then the next thing I did is I took and glued the little pendant, and it opens up to the top. That kind of was the inspiration for all of this, for the spider guy. I got this a couple months ago. Alpha Stamps has this, and I was looking at it and thinking, what could I do with it? And I thought, ooh, I'm going to use it for a creature. And to it, I glued a glass eye. It's flat on the back, the orange one. And then the other yellow eye into the loop is like a domed sticker eye. And so it's got the 2 eyes. And then to do the legs, first you need some kind of a rondelle or something to give you a place to glue the legs on. So I glued the rondelles around the base there, the round base where I wanted them, and then I separately assembled the legs. And the legs are just a matter of assembling straight pieces at angles and connecting them with other things, or just gluing stuff on top of them so they look like they're connected. I mean, they're connected, yes, because they're glued together, but if you want to glue something on top, that makes it look more like a joint, which is what I've done. The B towards the bottom is actually connected, but the other thing around, the bigger thing around the joint, that's just glued on top to make it look more like a joint. Again, these are a lot of clock pieces, which you may or may not have. You just need to look for things that are straight. And the other thing about thinking about the legs is assemble 3 going in one direction and 3 going in the other direction, so that when you start to put it together, you don't go, oh my gosh, all the legs are on one side. I don't have them for both sides. So think about that. Another suggestion for feet or some kind of claw mechanism is, you see in the picture on the far right, you can see that there's a jewelry clasp. That would look kind of cool. I've used that before on a steampunk little crab or lobster, and he had those for claws. And so that's the first minion, my little spider minion. Now this guy is my little insect minion, and my husband says it looks like a wasp. I think it kind of looks a little mosquito-y, and then one of my fellow designers at Alpha Stamps, Tristan, says it looks like a fly to him. So I'm just going to say it's an amalgamation of all 3, which I think is pretty terrifying, as annoying as flies are. And of course, who wants to get a mosquito bite, and nobody wants to be stung, so I'm just going to go with that. And this again was made, the body of it, with one of those tubes that are domed glass tubes. Which is cool because you could put stuff inside of it and see through it. And I used a clock piece to go in the middle of that. The tail is also another clock piece. The thing coming out the front, whether it's a stinger or whatever it is, it's another clock piece that fits in the front of the bead. And the body, the front of the body, the head and all, are made from 2 puffy beads that have holes in them. And I just used a small one and a larger one at the front of the bottle. And then the wings are another clock piece, and then you can see on the far right, the area where I'm showing all the different materials, those are the components of the leg. And just like the other one, my little spider guy, I put the rondelle on the bottle first where I wanted it to let that dry, built my legs separately. And you know, when you think about your legs, they can go in like the spider did, they can go straight down like the fly, or they can kind of go out. You know, the final joints can move out. Again, be conscious of what's going on. You can need 3 on one side and 3 on the other side. And as you can see, it's just a combination of odd little bits, and the foot is another little nut. One suggestion I have, I do steampunk fish and other things. Filigree can help you with this kind of stuff. You just look for the shapes and things. Like, I'm sure there's probably filigree out there that would give you the wing shape and some of the other shapes I've used. So that's always when you're building these steampunky kind of animals. Filigree, I use that a lot of times because it just gives you all the different kinds of shapes for the bodies, the wings, things like that. The facade of the laboratory looks very much like the other houses in the village. The only thing that's a little bit different is I'm using, like I said earlier, all 4 pieces of the houses that come in the set. And I also had to be mindful of the front in making a decision about how tall the platform was going to be on the back. And then I decided that since you were going to see the platform, and the idea is that this would be a higher roof behind the facade and with the dome on the top of it, that I would rim the top of the platform with the roof tile, just like the regular roofs. And then I added like paper lanterns. Those are in the digital kit. I added some cute pumpkins. So the outside kind of looks pretty normal and serene. And in the windows, you will see images of the inside of the lab. And those are also in the digital kit if you want to use those, as well as some blank windows. And of course, any of the windows, roofing, all those collage sheets that I did last year would work for this. And then another cool thing that I used was this, it's this, I don't know, like branchy stuff that's twisted all together, green branchy stuff that comes in a roll. And I just cut out every so much of it and then glued it in strips along the house for some foliage. And I thought it looked kind of crazy and wild and unkept. And then to cover where I glued it at the bottom, I used some moss and put that, sheet moss, and put that around there, and then put all the pumpkins on. And then if you just notice at the top right, you got Dr. Derange's nameplate on the side of the door, and then the little button, doorbell button, is an eyeball. Now, last thing, I just want to talk a little bit more about paper. In this picture here, the paper on the left side, the 5 pieces, are the 12 by 12 papers I used in various places for the project. The center green one, I didn't use the green side, I used the cream side of that. But you can see the flooring, the facade, and then the other papers that I used for the machine and the cabinet. I also talked a lot about using paper images from the digital kit. And then I also used images from my digital kit from last year's Halloween event, the kits that have roof in it, roof tiles, a whole bunch of different roof tiles. And there's also one that has a bunch of facades of bricks and stones and all that kind of stuff. But I realized that a lot of people aren't comfortable working with the digital kits or just don't have the software to do that. So if you are looking for things that give you a stone look, marble look, wood look, any of that kind of stuff, Alpha Stamps is carrying some new paper packs. They're each 6 by 6, and you can see that's on the left-hand side. And these things have all kinds of distressed papers and stone and brick and tin, marble, almost anything you can think of in terms of a textural surface. So if you do a lot of projects that use architecture and you need that kind of paper or look, that could be an option for you. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and my own mad creation. I hope I've given you some ideas for your projects. Be sure to hop over to my blog. On YouTube, the link is in the description section, where you will find supply lists, more pictures, and additional information on the project. May there be many dark and stormy nights in your future, and hold on to your brain.